Good morning, friends, and welcome. Today's talk is on nourishing the gods. Next week's is on masters as ideals and examples. Please join us here at 4865A Cordell Avenue, Bethesda, Maryland, 20814 at 11 o'clock every Sunday to be uplifted by these and other topics which are based on the ancient message recorded in all parts of nature and throughout the ages, and is transmitted to us by H.P. Blavatsky and William Q. Judge, and revived by Robert Crosby. Theosophy, in its purity, points to a glorious future for mankind, if we were only to make the effort to understand, sustain, and live this common sense philosophy. At 12:30 p.m. every first and third Sunday of each month, we read and discuss selected topic theosophical writings. This being the first Sunday of March, after this meeting, we will be continuing our roundtable reading and discussion of the Key to Theosophy by Madame Blavatsky. We are guided by our declaration, which is printed on the back of our program here, which is in print here and also at our website, www.ultdc.org. It says, "The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification and practice of these principles through a truer realization of the self, the higher self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all." The following is the form signed by associates of the United Lodge of Theosophists. "Being in sympathy with the purposes of this lodge as set forth in its declaration, I hereby record my desire to be enrolled as an associate, it being understood that such association calls for no obligation on my part other than which I myself determine." Today's reading starts on page 33 of the Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, on devotion through spiritual knowledge. "Those who have spiritual discrimination call him wise, whose undertakings are free from desire, for his actions are consumed in the fire of knowledge. He abandoneth the desire to seek a reward for his actions, is free, contented, and upon nothing dependeth. And although engaged in action, he really doeth nothing. He is not solicitous of results. With mind and body subdued, and being above enjoyment from objects, doing with the body alone the acts of the body, he does not subject himself to rebirth. He is contented with whatever he receives fortuitously, is free from the influence of the pairs of opposites and from envy, the same as success and failure, even though he is not bound by the bonds of action. All the actions of such a man who is free from self-interest, who is devoted, with heart set upon spiritual knowledge, and whose acts are sacrifices for the sake of the Supreme, are dissolved and left without effect on him. The Supreme Spirit is the act of offering. The Supreme Spirit is the sacrificial buddha offered in the fire, which is the Supreme Spirit. And unto the Supreme Spirit goeth he who maketh the Supreme Spirit the object of his meditation and performing his actions. And now for today's talk, Nourishing the Gods.
Good morning and welcome, friends. We just heard in the opening reading that unless our actions are done as sacrifice to the Supreme Spirit, then it remains a residue from those actions, which its effect comes back to us. In nourishing the gods, that sacrifice is extremely important to understand. As the Gita says, with this nourish the gods, that the gods may nourish you. Thus mutually nourishing, you shall obtain the highest felicity. At the beginning of this paragraph, sacrifice is also mentioned. I'd like to define what sacrifice is in this philosophy, because the word has been degraded. Yajna is in the Theosophical Glossary, and you can all look at it. The self-energized, willful, and thoughtful offering which wisdom makes for the growth of the weak and the ignorant, joyously because with a purpose, is sacrifice or yajna. Mother Nature, bountifully emptying herself in her myriads of forms, makes such a sacrifice. With full knowledge, the masters follow that example, who draw from the night of mortal existence their disciples, one by one, into the light of immortality. The gratitude expression of the Chhaya of old was this: salutations to the glorious Guru. He opened with his collyrium stick my sight blinded by the darkness of ignorance and restored to me the light of wisdom. Salutations to the glorious Guru. So, then the myriads of forms in and of nature are expressions of the one life. Well, when we put nourishing of the gods up there, then it naturally comes about that we should ask, who are the gods, and why do the gods need nourishment, and how can gods be nourished by worship with sacrifice? To answer that question, then we need to truly go to the secret doctrine for the definition of what gods are, because there is no God, but there are gods if we choose to address them that way. In the secret doctrine, there are the Ahi. And who are they? We'll read it. This is on page 38 of the Secret Doctrine 1. It says, the Ahi are the Dhyan Chohans, or Dhyan Chohans, and they are the collective hosts of spiritual beings, who are the vehicle for the manifestation of the divine or universal thought and will. They are intelligent forces that give to and enact in nature her laws, while themselves acting according to laws imposed upon them in a similar manner by still higher powers. So that this hierarchy of spiritual beings, through which the universal mind comes into action, is like an army, a host, truly. So, there we go. This host is an army. Why is this a statement there? Because they're not all belonging to one group. They have their own hierarchies, and these hierarchies in descending order from the highest in descending order come to the plane of material existence. What is in between here? The highest Ahi or Dhyan Chohans. Well, we have the Devas, and then we have the elementals, all the way down. In hierarchical form, it comes to our world. When it is then materialized and we see substance around us considered as matter because it is solidified. So, all forms of life then is composed of elementals. What about us? We are a small or miniature copy of what is in our universe. So whatever is out there, we encompass it in ourselves. So all our sheaths, all the way from a physical body to mind to spirit, comes from this host of hierarchies. They give us everything that we are. So they are sacrificing for us, are they not? From the highest to the lowest, everything is based on sacrifice because it is their essence that they are giving us. Would we be here without them? Obviously not. Well, let us see who these hierarchies are that give of their essence to humanity as a whole. Well, at the top we have the Dhyan Chohans. From the Dhyani-Buddhas, come our individuality. From the Kumaras, who are them? They are the mind-born sons of Brahma, comes our mind. They light the mind in men. And down below we have the Pitar Fathers. Who give us their Chhaya for our astral body to be built on, and from the astral body as a model, the physical body is formed. So all these beings sacrifice for humanity of their essence, all the way to the elementals. So all forms of life is composed of elementals, and all we do is by the aid of elementals. We could not have a thought without them. For once the thought leaves the mind, it coalesces with an elemental. It is giving it its character, what it is going to be. So, that impressing can be good or can be bad upon the thinking of the individual. So the thinking man of today then characterizes and sustains all of nature in its present state. Everything around us is dependent on our thinking. So, I'll take this off. So our thinking. Who are we? We are Manasa-Putras. We are mind beings. We are mind beings. Manasa-Putras. We are mind beings. So, our thinking characterizes and sustains our world. It is very important to understand that we actually mold everything around us according to our thinking. So, and the lower kingdoms enable us to have this body because it is made up of them. So they're very important too. So we can see from this hierarchical, from highest to the lowest, having in itself the essence that actually sustains the whole world, because the one life is there. Everything lives within it. It sustains everything. So if you look at around, when we look around us, we notice that the mineral kingdom sacrifices itself for the vegetable kingdom, both to the animal and all three to the human kingdom. To feed men, all of the lower kingdoms sacrifice themselves from mineral, vegetable, animal to man. All three sacrifice themselves for us. But in that process, they're each raised to a higher state. It states that the dull apathy of the mineral is aroused to a fuller perception in the vegetable. The vegetable awakens to heightened consciousness in the animal, and so on. So by their peculiar worship with sacrifice, nourishing the next higher form of life, they're being elevated and nourished in their own turn by that metempsychosis, which is transmigration. But man lives upon the sacrifice of all of the kingdoms, not just the higher, but also the lower kingdoms. So, we cannot lift an arm without the help of elementals. We cannot entertain a feeling without elementals, nor can we evolve a thought without their aid. So, how are we recompensing those kingdoms that we use for our own benefit? Because we, in another talk, had mentioned that all those lives, all the atoms in our universe are all destined to become men in very, very later future evolution. So, it is our duty then to give the right impetus so that they can also reach to our own estate. But when we look around, we can see that maleficence of both plants and animals bear witness that man is far from accomplishing this great task, because they have been fed on our treatment of them, which is iniquity, and so they wait their redemption, which can only come through us. So these lower kingdoms are all future men. And they wait their turn dependent on the impulse we give nature. It is our thinking that characterizes and sustains our environment, and all these beings in mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms are dependent on us and on our thinking as to how they're going to progress in future manvantras. So, the article states that the highest elementals are no longer with us because there is no such thought process in our environment to sustain them. This is really sad. It's okay, I take it off. So, the highest elementals are not with us anymore because our thought processes do not sustain them. What does that mean? That means that the plant food is not of such a quality that can sustain life in the highest degree that we need them to. Why are we ill? Why do we have to take all these vitamins continuously? Because the food is produced, but its quality is not high. Food is produced, but its quality not high. It says that just as we as human beings and all those other life forms around us require fresh and clean air to sustain their bodies, and us too, whether the food is physical, psychical, mental, or spiritual, it is produced by the sensations, desires, thoughts, or will of men, and the gods composing these various bodies feed upon their own proper and corresponding kind. And we just read from the Gita where Krishna says he is the food and the sacrificial butter. So then, how do we provide sustenance to these kingdoms so that we are beneficent to them rather than maleficent? Because when you look around, there are animals and plants that are maleficent to humanity, and it is very obvious. We are the manufacturing principle in nature that bring all those lives, because all of the animal kingdom comes from us, from our leftover substances. So we need to understand that we affect everything in our universe, but not only that, our thinking characterizes and sustains. We should put those words up here. And sustains our universe, our thinking, everything around us. Okay, sorry, some of you did not see it, but we put the hierarchy of the gods, if we want to use that word gods, but in the secret doctrine, they are referred to as the Ahi, which is Dhyan Chohans, and all of the Devas, and all the way down to our physical world, which is composed of elementals being the sustaining power before the atomic energy in the atoms. So they're the soul part of that equation. How do we then make this sacrificial nourishing of the gods so that we can influence our environment? Well, as we saw just now, all of the lower kingdoms sacrifice themselves for the kingdom above it, and all three, including the elementals, sacrifice for men. So how do we then worship with sacrifice in ourselves? What's in us? The God within us. What is that God? We can call it the Christ principle, we can call it Krishna, we can call it Atma Buddhi Manas, we can call it anything we want, but it is the same power, it is the same spiritual energy, regardless of how we define it. And I want to read to you from HPV's quotation from Bulwer Lytton's work, Zanoni. It is a very poetical description of the inner man, but I think it brings the view home to us as to who truly we are. Here it is. This is Zanoni asking or commanding, Adonai, Adonai, appear, appear. And in the lonely cave, whence once had gone forth the oracles of a heathen god, there emerged from the shadows of fantastic rocks a luminous and gigantic cone, glittering and shifting. It resembled the shining but misty spray, which seen afar off, a fountain seems to send up on a starry night. The radiance lit the stalactites, the crags, the arches of the cave, and shed a pale and tremulous splendor on the features of Zanoni. Zanoni is invoking the Father in us. I'll skip some of the parts and come here. From the cone there emerged a shape of unimaginable glory. Its face was that of a man in its first youth, but sown as with the consciousness of eternity and the tranquility of wisdom. Light, like starbeams, flowed through its transparent veins. Light made its limbs themselves and undulated in restless sparkles through the waves of its dazzling hair. So when we look at ourselves, we must not assume that we are the body. We're the soul occupying this body. So Atma Buddhi Manas then is shrined within our own flesh. Without sacrifice then, there is no worship. And sacrifice, of course, takes many different forms. The higher self then must be provided with a physical instrument. The physical instrument has to be pure. Mr. Judge writes in an article that all of the Gnanis have left this sphere, and we need to invite them back so that their wisdom can sustain all of the kingdoms, including man. What's necessary for this process? These are pure munis. So in order to invite them back here, we have to have pure physical instruments. They cannot be invited, they cannot incarnate any other way. Madame Blavatsky states that we can procreate Buddha-like children, but whether we attract to ourselves pure or vicious souls depends on our will and action, that is, on the nature of our sacrifice. So these great and wise beings awaiting rebirth upon this planet, who can incarnate only in bodies of corresponding exalted to their exalted nature, must be furnished with vehicles. So these Gnanis need parents who sacrifice all the fleshly and sensual desires to raising children. So it depends on us as to how we're going to attract these Gnanis. We have to become totally devoted to the service of humanity in mind when we are raising our children. And that purity has to show, obviously, through our own sacrifice. So, having gained a body, the God within immediately becomes the victim of the lover self. Victim, lower self. Okay, we have listened to a lot of talks on the mind and the lower personality previous to this talk. So this student does not have time to go into it, but that link must be understood in all of its ramifications, because at this stage of our development, it is that part of us, our karmic nature, that controls everything that occurs in our environment. And we said that our thinking principle characterizes and sustains our world. So it is that needs to change in order that these higher gnanis can come into our world, and we need to enable them to be able to incarnate in pure bodies. So, this imprisoned God, we just read this very poetical description of who that imprisoned God is. What did we say it was? It's light energy, because it is made up of light that shimmers and glitters. So what are we? We are a stardust. We're not this physical body. That inner man has to be given an opportunity to express itself outwardly, so that our thinking can also impress its effect on all and everything that we come into touch with. So, she says, the imprisoned God hungers for righteousness and can be fed only by noble aspirations and right actions. This is not an easy thing to do. Noble aspirations and right or correct action. And the opening from the Gita was about correct action that leads to sacrifice. So, what are these? What are these? Well, there we are, Paramitas again. The Paramitas are necessary if we are going to live a true life of a spiritual aspiration, because if we don't have those in us, our actions will not be sacrificial, and then they will not be correct. What are we talking about here? We've gone through this many, many times. We're going to briefly go over it. What is it? Love is the first criteria. There's an article which says, love is beyond time and space. It is never lost. Wherever it is rescinded, it is received. So love and kindness comes first. In all aspects of life, love and kindness. What's the other? Temperance, even-mindedness, tolerance. I'll put love up here and kindness. Compassion includes all of them. So we have to cultivate these in us, and from that comes caring. If we don't care, would we do the right thing by our neighbor even, or by our family? We would say, well, hey, they can go out and work for it and get it for themselves. Okay. So, only as the mortal recognizes the indwelling immortal and sacrifices all his intentions to it, can this high God nourish him, thus bring about the highest felicity. As man performs proper sacrifices, the more advanced beings of the race sacrifice themselves for him. In fact, no human progress were possible did not these great ones leave their high estate and come among ordinary mortals, though but a few profit by the supreme renunciation. So by their example and teaching, they nourish those who sit starving for the bread of wisdom, the bread that feeds the shadow, and also the eternal man. So we come at last to see that life is a reciprocal process. We listed at the beginning all of the hierarchies that sacrifice for men, and brought it all the way through the different hierarchies to the Devas, and to all the way down to the elementals, and how everything is made up of that elemental world, and how our thinking constantly is coalesced with an elemental, and then it has its life and being started from there. So this reciprocal process then is sacrifice so that that kingdom can be fed. But as it's feeding the higher, it loses its life to it, but it is nevertheless elevated by that process. So, in the Gita again, he who enjoyeth what hath been given him by the gods, and offereth not a portion unto them, is even as a thief. So, well, this is all the time we have. But for those who did not listen to this, we will finish it with the expression of sacrifice. From the HPB's glossary has Yajna in there, and you can read that for yourself. The self-energized, willful and thoughtful offering which wisdom makes for the growth of the weak and the ignorant, joyously because with a purpose, is sacrifice, or Yajna. Mother Nature, bountifully emptying herself in her milliards of forms, makes such a sacrifice. With full knowledge, the masters follow that example, who draw from the night of mortal existence their disciples one by one into the light of immortality. So that great brotherhood is out there, whether we know it or not, assisting humanity to the best possible chances that we enable them to come into our lives and to do so. So we'll open it for questions. Yes.
You mentioned the highest thought elementals were no longer with us because there's nothing to sustain them. Is there, couldn't they be sustained in some way, or at least in some small part, by sages, Mahatmas, adepts, by their highest thought processes?
Well, considering where those beings are, remember they live on the spiritual plane, don't they? And they can take any form and can expend their energy, the spiritual energy, in the appropriate manner. But there is an article which clarifies succinctly that as they take a step, so does the other side. So they take those steps very cautiously. Sometimes it is stated that, I think, I hope this does not come across as a negative, but it was discussing Jesus' appearance on earth, that it was very untimely, and that the Brotherhood recommended to him that he not do it. But he insisted that he wanted to help the Jewish nation, and he incarnated. I think it was about 150 years before the historical era. That's not our discussion, but that's where it was talked about. That when a step is taken in the benefit of humanity, sometimes it has exactly the opposite effect, because his coming was a tremendous effort on part of that brotherhood to give that impulse to humanity, but yet look where it took. She discusses vicarious atonement, lack of self-responsibility, because apparently Christ supposed to absorb all our sins, or some such notion that this student is not familiar with. So I don't want to degrade that, but that was the gist of it. So to answer your question, it is that us as a human family living on earth that has that responsibility, because they are very careful as to where they interject that spiritual energy and what its opposite is going to be. So this student does not quite understand how that occurs on those fields of energy or fields of consciousness, but has an idea as to what they mean by the opposite effect. So the suggestion is that we need to cultivate our mind to express higher levels of consciousness, which draws it towards its divine nature. Put it that way. And that as this struggle goes in each of us to do our very best and to express higher and purer thought processes, that it attracts the elementals that can sustain your thought process into your being, and in that process you are etherealizing and purifying. So it's up to us to go through this process and not expect higher beings to interject their energy when it is our duty to go through this process, because eventually, regardless of how many thousands of years it takes, as a social necessity, we're going to etherealize. In other words, the human physical body is going to etherealize in some shape or form, according to that chart. I think it's on page 300, somewhere in there, of the Secret Doctrine, where she shows the correlation of coming down into substance and our reverse process going up towards our home, where we have originally come from. So this divine nature has to be cultivated. What exactly is she referring to here? She has a point, in her mind when she writes these things. She wants us to activate centers in brain that correlate to these higher activities. Intuition, discrimination, she wants these activated. Because without these two, what kind of activity would we be conducting? Because this thing says our action has to be correct, not just our thinking. So action that comes from the higher divine nature is the correct one. But until we activate these centers, they're dormant in us. Because I believe when the Atlanteans, who are ourselves, were doing all these negative activity in the sense that it was destructive, knowingly, because their pineal gland, which is that spiritual center, was still functioning, we then drew onto ourselves this great debt to nature by not doing the right actions. For now, we are the fifth sub of the fifth root, and it is our duty to activate these centers. especially those students who are in the Theosophical movement and who understand their duty towards humanity, because they are the forerunners, according to the other students' talk on races and rounds. She made a statement in that talk where she said she wasn't quite sure whether we're the forerunners or we're actually the sixth up. So it falls on us to understand the philosophy, but not just to understand it, but to live it. So the way, life, and the living cannot be separated. They're all one. And until we do that, this is not an easy process, but the suggestion was that a lot of us think that it's okay to give what is left of our personal needs and however we want to spend our time, money, and energy. But in this philosophy, not the leftovers, but the first fruit has to be sacrificed to it. That's the writing. So the student understands it, but it's not such an easy way to live, because all and everything that gets sacrificed for living the higher life. Perhaps we should also visit the home life from that little book that we have, Building of the Home. Perhaps we should give a talk on this and visit what actually is necessary, because it is totally in the opposite direction than our social norm is. This book actually tells us what the home life needs to be, how we become purified from life to life, and also help our family to purify. Because HPV says it is our responsibility, if we know a little bit, to teach it to our family, to remove the defects in yourself so that it can be removed from your family line. And as you incarnate in the same family line over and over again and purify it, this process that we've been talking about, elevation occurs. And that way we not only elevate everything around us, but we also elevate who incarnates into our family line in each succeeding life, this purification as it expresses itself. So that's a roundabout way of answering your question. I do not know how to do it directly. Any other question? Yes?
I was also reading that, as nature synthesis and voice, as we go through this process of purification and so forth, what we're doing we're trying to activate those centers that you're talking about, that nature reacts in. In other words, we basically are magicians in our thinking process. Does that sound in sync with what you're talking about?
When you look around, what exactly is going on in our environment? Everything is being cultivated, but what it is cultivated for, it's greed, it's attachment, it's wanting more. The gist of these articles is that that cultivation has to elevate life, that it needs to make life sweeter and saner, not greedier, not more attachment to things, not for more wealth, not for exploiting the people who have less education and less resources to the advantage of the 2-3% at the top, which is what is going on all around the world. Billionaires coming out and saying, we're going to help humanity by now donating half of our wealth. But who is making those decisions as to how that wealth is going to be spent? Is it going to the poor? It is being spent according to what they think it ought to be spent on. It is not distributed to the poor equally so that they can also cultivate themselves out of that condition. Education, freedom of thought is necessary, for humanity to move forward. We're talking about the thought process characterizing and sustaining our environment. So if the 2-3 person at the top is going to tell the rest of the humanity what to do, is that what this is saying? Absolutely not. This is saying that each human soul has exactly the same value as the next soul. We're all souls. We just described what that soul nature is. It's light. It's a spiritual light energy. So we're not of this world. We're simply here to cultivate the environment so that in the future ages, its evolutionary process will be the same as that of men. All these elementals, these atoms, are going to be future men, says psychic and noetic action. So we need to understand what we're dealing with here and cultivate the nature to a saner and more beautiful expression of itself, so that it also brings itself to the assistance of humanity and helps it. These elementals are intelligent. They have an intelligence of their own kind. And in the article it is stated that each elemental world is a kingdom, and they learn to do their particular task perfectly well. This word perfect. Perfectly well. So they know how to do one thing, but repeatedly they do it perfectly. So the human mind, because it has this free will and choice, has forgotten what perfectly well means, because we have moved away from it. So this is where we want to go to. We need to use our discrimination and intuitive powers to get back to knowing what perfectly well action is. And we were able to do it when our pineal gland was active, but when we lost that ability, that spiritual ability, now we are dependent on our sensory glands and vehicles in getting information from the universe, where the brain then transcribes it or translates it, and the inner man gets experience that way. But that is not all of it, is it? That's just one part of it. In one of her articles, she says there are two forces in nature, right? And we need to understand them. What are they? Centrifugal and centripetal. Okay. This is what keeps everything in harmony. And these two forces has to align themselves perfectly well in us in order for us to express it perfectly. What does those represent? She tells it to us in the key to Theosophy. What's the centrifugal? This is center out. This is periphery in. We just described the periphery in, getting information from the universe and bringing it into our brain function, where the mind is in charge of it and the soul above it. So centrifugal is then what? It's our buddhi. And this one is the mind. So this was in the key. So these two forces then operate in us. It is for us to cultivate the higher nature, bring the buddhi in. The center, our spiritual self, is the buddhi is the vehicle of Atman, right? So that the spiritual energy is there. It's in us. But it has to be brought into play. It has to be brought into making that decision process for us, where it influences the thinking process to altruistic and to universal expression. Because humanity as a family is one. We're made of souls, but each soul is the same as the other. There's absolutely no difference between the souls. Its expression is different in each human mortal, and the expression makes all the difference, but it is exactly the same. It says here, sacrifice is no bargaining. We said that the word sacrifice has changed its meaning over the time. In the olden times, there were mysteries, there were mysterious schools. Once those things started disappearing, then we have mysterious schools disappeared. What do we have in its place? Dogma. The mysterious schools are totally gone. We have churches. This is where people go for enlightenment. And it's said that where sacrifice was expressed in those, in our times, sacrifice has become bargain. Why? Because in those times, our relationship with the higher self that we read a description of is direct. Each human soul has this ability to call to its aid that luminous, starry spirit. The Father in heaven is not in heaven. It's right here in our flesh, okay? So we can pull it to our aid. How does it come to our aid? Well, Zanoni very poetically actually tells us how that aid is, it says here, Son of eternal light, Zanoni now addressing the Father, thou to whose knowledge grade after grade, race after race, I attained at last on the broad Chaldean plains. Thou from whom I have drawn so largely of the unutterable knowledge that yet eternity alone can suffice to drain, thou who, congenial with myself, so far as our various beings will permit, has been for centuries my familiar and my friend. Answer me and counsel. So that Father is there. Whether we know it is there or not, it's up to each one to come to that conclusion that it is there. And I know that our wisdom comes but from the indifference to the things of the world, which the wisdom masters. The mirror of the soul cannot reflect both earth and heaven, and the one vanishes from the surface as the other is glassed upon its deep. But it is not to restore me to that sublime abstraction to which the intellect, free and disembodied, rises region after region. We have all these powers in us. All we have to do is activate it through sacrifice in our lives, not from the leftovers, but from the first found. That's the criteria. Yes?
You mentioned that humans are making impressions in all the three kingdoms, mineral, vegetable, and animal. And that's going to help for when they, in the next round, become humans. It seems to me that humans are abusing those three kingdoms. What impact is going to have in that transformation, transmigration from those kingdoms to humans?
Well, we just talked about it.
Yeah, but can you
So you want to know how that transformation occurs?
No, the impact.
The impact is very noticeable, because the writing says that all you have to do is look around you to see that we're not paying our debt to the lower kingdoms, because they're not beneficent to us. That even the plants and the animals are maleficent. There are some plants, if you touch it, you get all kinds of skin abrasions, poison ivy, for instance, right? You have to just look around, and there's a whole bunch of them that are poisonous to human beings. Mushrooms, for instance, you can eat it and die. So all of the plant kingdom at its original function was beneficent to humanity, and the animals have become maleficent too. All you have to do is look at the tigers, the crocodiles. There's a whole bunch of, and the smaller ones, the ones that have poison, like the snakes. This tiny little snake that lives on the tree and can actually hook onto your neck, and that's it. You're done, because it decapitates your nervous system and you're finished. And these things exist. Spiders, poisonous spiders, they are all over the place. So we are not obviously honoring our responsibility to these kingdoms. And here it says, perhaps we should read it.
I understand that part, but what's going to happen when those kingdoms become humans?
Well, we're retarding them is the point. We're retarding their progress is what this is saying. Retardation is occurring, okay? Instead of nourishing them so that they can flourish, we are nourishing them and retarding them. They're retarding their progress. For this, we incur a tremendous debt. And until we restore them to their proper function with our thinking first corrected, and then treating them in a humane manner. There are people who abuse pets. They get dogs that they cannot take care of. They don't feed them. They starve them. They abuse their pets. That kindness we talked about at the beginning, love and kindness, is not just to your own kind. It's for all of those things that we come into contact. So as you show love towards them, I love my plants. I truly love them. And when I serve them, I give them food, water, I do it with love, because it's in my nature. I truly love them. I love those plants. That is what they're talking about. If you have a pet, then you show love. When we keep a pet for another family, we wash them, we take them for a walk, we feed them, we treat them like our own family. That's what that is. That everything that we come into contact with, you express this love and kindness towards them. And as you pay this debt, then you enable them to progress. What did we say? That the elementals learn how to do one thing very well. There is a Mr. Judge article you should read where he describes a scene that he comes across these beings, and some of them are able to do their work and some of them are not. Some of them express light, some of them do not. I will give you the reference. It's not in my mind what the title of that article is, but he comes into a center of earth and goes through, and this scene becomes apparent to him. Obviously he's looking at it with his inner eye, because these diminutive beings are not visible to our exterior eye, and he's looking at that scene, and he says that by thinking correctly we enable them to do their work. Because why? They're joyous. all universe is based on harmony of those two forces, centripetal and the centrifugal forces. All of the solar system remains intact because of those two forces being in equilibrium. When we disharmonize with our thinking, that force has to equilibrate. That is how we make karma. So in order to pay this debt, it is important for us to understand it, but also to do it, not just think it, but actually express it in love and kindness to everything that we come into contact with. We pay a little bit of this debt, we move them forward to maybe learn another ability, because elementals are kingdoms and they have hierarchies of their own, because from one function maybe they go to two functions, but at this stage they each do one function. And the article also said that the ones that become the placental life do not have any contact with humanity whatsoever. So, yes?
Quick question, I think. I'm thinking about why we became a society that we became, and I'm thinking back at the Atlanteans and what you said about the brain, our brain and its functions. We were, at one time, mind beings, if you will, to the point where we could do what was, we could do all kinds of things. And there's only, there's a glimmer of that now, but it seems to have gone pretty much in the background, but only a few seem to understand what you're talking about.
Oh, I think there's a lot more out there who understand, or they're searching for the truth and they have not yet discovered as to what is the truth for themselves. This is a process that the human soul has to go through in order to come to some kind of decision making for itself. Somebody from the outside maybe can say a word or two and influence it, or they hear a music that influences them, or a poet. It just depends what awakens the inner life. But each human soul is on this journey. We're all at different places progressively. We influence one another, and the mind taking the highest responsibility in this process, of course. But in the Atlantean age, pineal gland was still active, that the spiritual center showed directly to the perceiver what they were looking at. The article suggested that the Atlantean nation was divided into two halves. One side was using these powers for destructive purposes. They were actually destroying parts of land and human beings, destroying it, or they wanted to conquer it. One half had the ability to translate the inner gifts to outward benefit for humanity. The half that was doing all this wicked stuff sank, caused the land to sink, and the good part, or the core of the good part, was used for the next humanity. So this is how our progression goes, whether we believe it or not. This is how nature works, and we cannot get around it because it is connected. I was looking for something to finish it with, and I'm not sure where it is. Let me see. Maybe it's not in here. I don't know where it is. Yeah, here it is. It says, everyone who really knows Theosophy and who of necessity has gained that knowledge by sacrifice is able to look back upon the former phases of his life and see their unconscious sorrow, sadness, and hopelessness in contrast with the inexhaustible hope and eagerness of his present road. If this is so, even when that road carries him through situations seemingly dark indeed to those who know nothing of his inner life. So, the Theosophy is not written in books. It is the way and the life, and it is how we live it that actually makes it real for each human being. And with that, we will close today's meeting. Thank you very much.
Okay, please join us next week for Masters as Ideals and Examples, and in a few minutes we'll start our roundtable study on the key to Theosophy. Thank you.